With me is Kathleen Rodgers. Kathleen is a novelist, and she has written a novel called The Final Salute. And I understand that it took you quite a while to get this published. Tell me the background and the story about that.
I started the novel 16 years ago in 1992. We'll be coming up on 17 years. My husband just retired as a fighter pilot from the Air Force and got hired by a major airline. My boys were 4 and 6, so I was a full-time mother. But I always wanted to write a novel. I'd written for Family Circle magazine and Air Force, Army, and Navy Times, but I wanted to try fiction. And fiction is very different than nonfiction writing, so it took me many, many years to get it right. But I've rewritten it over 100 times, had many rejections, but I kept at it because I believed in my story and I believed in my characters.
Okay, good. Well, let's talk about that. All of us are taught in our writing classes to write what we know best, and your book is about Air Force people and Air Force wives and pilots. What was your experience in life in terms of being married to a pilot? Were you afraid at times? What's it like?
I was 21 years old when I married my pilot, Tom Rodgers, and we were out in Tucson, and we were there about 3 weeks, and on the 6 o'clock news, Air Force jet crashes over the desert, pilot killed. I was alone in a little motel, no phones, and I didn't even have a phone in my room. I had no way to get hold, and I didn't know anyone, and I waited until I heard my husband's car, and I ran out the door and realized it wasn't him, he was okay. The guy that was killed sat right next to him in academics. He was a major. A few months later, the man that played the trumpet at my wedding at Cannon Air Force Base, he was a captain, fighter pilot, F-111 pilot. He was killed coming in on final approach into Cannon on February 6, 1980. 6 months later, another a Major Sam Taylor was killed, and he was also a friend of my husband's, even though my husband had transitioned to A-10 fighters at the time. So those real stories buried themselves in my heart and soul, and I couldn't forget about them. And over time, they came out in articles I'd written for Air Force and Navy Times, but it was never enough. I could never quite exorcise those ghosts. And I have fictionalized some of that in my novel. But, and I always also tried to figure out what makes fighter pilots tick, because fighter pilots are cut from a different cloth than the rest of us. And then you take off the flight suit and you have to get to the man behind the uniform. And once you're there, they're like everyone else, but it's the way they handle emotion.
Well, while we're talking about fighter pilots, I understand that at least, you know, I'm a student of history, and my understanding of pilots who flew during World War II, they had to have a pretty good ego. They had to think quite a bit of themselves in order to be able to stand the pressure of going out to that runway, going up in the air, and knowing that there's somebody going to be out there shooting at them that day. Did you find that to be true?
A lot of the ego is a facade. It's a way to protect yourself from the realities, because the average fighter pilot does not wake up every morning, look in the mirror, and say to himself, "Today, I'm going to go kill myself." No, the average fighter pilot that goes out on a training mission, my book's more about training missions, there is war, but he's expecting to come back to that squadron, debrief, and drive home. If he's married, he's expecting to go home to his wife and kids. He's expecting to make the Cub Scout meeting, the school meeting, and once in a while that doesn't happen, and his car sits in the squadron parking lot for, you know, a day or two till a family member or a buddy drives it home. And those are the kind of things that haunted me and kept me at my book, because I knew from my perspective as a fighter pilot's wife and also a writer that I had a different story to tell. And I've had a lot of pilots read my book, commercial pilots and military, and they said, "You've done something that's never been done before. You've meshed the military, the fighter pilot, with the wife, the family, the children, and somehow made it work."
Okay. In your book, there is a war. Did you experience wartime? Did you have a wartime experience in your marriage?
My husband was served in Vietnam before I even knew him. And then he went over to the setup for Desert, he was there for Desert Shield, and his retirement papers were already in, so he got to come home right before Desert Storm kicked in. But I had many, many friends whose husbands flew over there, and then we had 2 friends of ours who ended up being POWs. So I just took everybody I knew, and all my characters are composites of people I knew, and I just tried to write an authentic story with authentic characters to make it feel real.
Okay, well, let's help some potential writers out there.
Okay, that's what I'd like to talk about.
And you mentioned that you had written for magazines. You'd written magazine-style articles. Talk to me about your early education.
Okay.
When in school did you think, boy, I think I want to write?
Thank you. This is so important to me. I think it all started at Clovis High School in Clovis, New Mexico. Mr. Bill Kopp, and Mr. Bill Kopp, if you ever find out, I would be so happy. I was a junior in high school. I signed up for home ec. Why? Because I was never going to get married and have children. The first day in class, we were told to carry around raw eggs to pretend they were babies. I thought, this is horrible. I hate this. So I found out from a friend that the same period was the high school newspaper. Go down and talk to the sponsor and see if they'll let you switch. The next thing I know, I get myself on the high school newspaper, and I started writing. And my senior year in high school, I won Best Story and Most Improved Writer. And I also won first place in the New Mexico Press Women's Association. And that story was called, it was about UFOs. It was called Strange Blobs of Light Whiz Through the Night. That article and that award got the attention of Mike Slinker at ENMU and Mr. Cox, Winston Cox, and they called me down for an interview, and that's how I got on the student writer there, and then went to school down here about a year. Then I went part-time to school, and I got a job at the Clovis News-Journal, working under the late Bill Southard, the editor, and he taught me a lot, and I worked at the News-Journal about a year and a half. I somehow knew that that kind of journalism wasn't really my style, but it was a start. And then I married my pilot, and we moved around, but I just kept writing as a freelancer and just trying to, it's a lot of work. You can go to conferences, you can take classes, you can read, but the hardest part, and a lot of writers don't want to hear it, you got to sit down and you got to do the work. You have to write and rewrite. Rewriting and revision is the key.